Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Today's video features true Halloween horror stories. You could really call it being in the wrong place at the wrong time. October 31st holds lots of mystique, and there's so much surrounding this night. All Hallows Eve. Sit back, relax, and stay sinful. In 1992, a 16-year-old Japanese foreign exchange student in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, paid the ultimate price after accidentally ringing the wrong doorbell on his way to a Halloween party. Yoshihiro Hattori had been unfamiliar with the neighborhood when he and a friend arrived at the home of Rodney Pierce, a nearby neighbor who opened the door armed with a .44 Magnum revolver. Although Hattori allegedly said, "We're here for the party," Pierce claimed he feared for his life and ordered the student to freeze. When Hattori misunderstood the command and kept approaching, Pierce shot him. After being questioned, the perpetrator was arrested, but later acquitted of manslaughter. It's unknown what kind of Halloween costume Hattori wore to warrant such a reaction. Famed magician Harry Houdini claimed he could take a blow to the abdomen without being taken down, and on October 22, 1926, a student at McGill University asked if he could prove it. Houdini, who had been sitting in his dressing room during an engagement at the Montreal University, gladly obliged. Although he had allegedly braced himself, the student's 4 punches left the performer in great pain. After suffering for 2 days, Houdini decided to seek medical help, but by the time he was suffering from a severe fever and acute appendicitis. Defying doctors' orders, he performed instead of undergoing the recommended surgery. When the curtains closed, the magician collapsed. Despite having his appendix removed afterward, Houdini passed away on Halloween, surrounded by his family. On Halloween Day in 1963, the Indiana State Fair held a Holidays on Ice skating exhibition for a crowd of hundreds. The grand finale was not what anyone had expected. Unbeknownst to the organizers at the Indiana State Fairgrounds Coliseum, propane gas had been leaking from a nearby tank into the poorly ventilated room. During a final act called Mardi Gras, the propane gas caught fire, leading to a horrific explosion that propelled onlookers from their chairs. The death toll was 74, and 400 additional people were injured. The tradition of throwing eggs on Halloween is at its best a harmless prank. At worst, it can turn deadly. That was the case for Carl Jackson, a 21-year-old data entry clerk at Morgan Stanley, who usually never left the house on Halloween, as they thought it was dangerous. On October 31st, 1995, his worst fear became a reality, reports the New York Times. Jackson had decided to venture out to pick up his girlfriend's son from a party. Along the way, a group of teens pelted his car with eggs, so Jackson got out to confront them. But as he was getting back into his car, one of the pranksters pulled a gun and fatally shot him in the head. To this day, no one knows what happened to Hyeon Jung Cindy Song, a 39-year-old grad student at Penn State University, who disappeared without a trace after leaving a Halloween party after midnight in 2001. Song had stopped by a friend's house in the early morning hours, still decked out in her bunny costume, and accepted a lift home at 4 a.m. Slightly intoxicated, she managed to get inside her home and drop off her belongings, including her backpack and cell phone. She'd even removed her false eyelashes, but Song herself was never seen again. Investigators found no evidence of foul play and no activity on her credit cards or cell phone. The case eventually went cold. David Berkowitz became infamous in the 1970s as the son of Sam serial killer. Not many people know that he could also predict the future. Well, sort of. Berkowitz was incarcerated when 39-year-old Ronald Sisman and 20-year-old Elizabeth Platzman were beaten and shot to death in their Manhattan home in the early hours of Halloween in 1981. A fellow prisoner claimed that the son of Sam had previously told him that a cult was planning out to carry out the massacre. Berkowitz was allegedly even able to describe the victim's apartment to a T, but police didn't have enough evidence to charge him with involvement in the murders, which remain unsolved. If there was a prize for the most morbid Halloween decoration in Frederica, Delaware in 2005, it would have gone to the body hanging from a tree. It would have beaten out the fake witches, skeletons, and jack-o'-lanterns dotting the neighborhood. For hours, people passed by admiring it. Of course, it had an edge over the other decorations. This was a real body. Police believe it was that of a woman who had committed suicide the night before. Not everyone's wearing a costume on Halloween. In 2012, in the early hours of the morning after Halloween, a tutu-clad Marine spotted a uniform-clad man in a wheelchair and thought the man's costume was a weak attempt at mocking the military, so he attacked the man. As the Marine learned upon his arrest, the man's wardrobe was not a comment on our servicemen and women. He was in fact a disabled veteran. It's every parent's nightmare. Your child comes home from a night of trick-or-treating with spiked candy. One of the Halloween stories that helped propel this fear was the murder of Timothy O'Brien in 1974. The 8-year-old from Deer Park, Texas, died Halloween night after ingesting poisoned candy. Making this crime more horrific is the fact that the perpetrator was not a neighbor, but the boy's own father, who sought to cash in on his son's life insurance. The most frightening thing about the graveyard kit an Oregon woman bought at Kmart in 2012 was a note she found inside. It was written by a Chinese factory worker who claimed he and others were tortured and enslaved in a forced labor camp, making toys 15 hours a day with no pay or days off. He went on to plead for the letter to be forwarded to the World Human Rights Organization. The woman did just that, and the Chinese worker was freed when the camp was exposed months later. It's bad enough to have collapsed and died alone on your own porch steps, but adding insult to injury, the morning after this 2012 Halloween tragedy, the mailman, assuming the body was an excellent decoration, sidestepped the deceased on his way to delivering the corpse's mail. The year was 1957 Halloween night. A couple was getting ready for bed when the doorbell rang. It was late, but the husband answered the door, ready to dole out more candy. Instead, an adult wearing a mask shot him in the chest, killing him. Was it a trick-or-treater dissatisfied with the candy selection? Not quite. The murderer, it turns out, was the girlfriend of a woman who had had an affair with the murdered man's wife. The woman convinced her girlfriend to do away with the husband in order to have the wife for herself. Candy might be important, but it's certainly not worth your life. It was Halloween night 2011 when a 55-year-old Chicago resident realized his candy bag was missing. He blamed a neighbor for the missing sweets and took his revenge to an extreme, stabbing her to death with several steak knives. On Halloween Day in 1955, Marilyn Damon went to a food fair on Long Island to do some shopping. She brought her children, 2-year-old Stephen and 7-month-old Pamela. Telling Stephen to be good and watch his little sister, she left the children outside while she went into the store. She returned 10 minutes later to find that her children had disappeared, stroller and all. Pamela's baby stroller with the unharmed 7-month-old inside was found a short distance away, but Long Island police were never able to locate Stephen. What happened to him remains a mystery. People thinking dead bodies are Halloween decorations seems to be a gruesome trend in these Halloween stories. However, in 2017, the opposite actually happened. In mid-September, police in Greene County, Tennessee, received a panicked phone call from a man who believed there was a beheaded corpse in his neighbor's driveway. Police arrived on the scene only to find that the owner of the home had actually just put out his creepy Halloween display a little early. Do not call 911 reporting a dead body, the police department's Facebook page wrote. Instead, congratulate the homeowner on a great display. This happened back when I was a teenager. For some background, I'm female and was 16 at the time. My parents went out of town and let me have a sleepover with some friends. We'll call them Nikki and Ed. We decided to stay in for Halloween and just binge watch horror films and pass out candy. We got a few trick-or-treaters, but not very many, as we lived on the rough side of town. Fast forward to the darker hours, around 12 or 1 a.m., and we were still in movie mode, having had ordered pizza and wired up with a big bowl of candy. Suddenly there were 3 loud bangs coming from the front door. It almost sounded like they were kicking it. I smiled at my friends since they were all shaken and said, "Relax, guys. It's probably some late-night trick-or-treaters." Boy, was I wrong. I go to the door and open just a smidge, with my foot behind the door, and I look up to see 2 large men in creepy masks. One of them says to me, "Trick or treat." At first I'm thinking, that's very funny, guys, believing it to be a couple of pranksters. I laugh uncomfortably and ask where their candy bag is. I know, naive me thinking they were here for candy. Suddenly one of them tries to push the door open, but luckily I had my foot behind it, and I yelled to my friends to come help me close the door. Ed jumps up and slams one of the men's fingers as we fight to close the door. When closed, we instantly locked it. A few more bangs on the door and then silence. You would think that would be the end of it, right? But no. Sadly for us, we didn't call the cops after, and resumed to watching the movie after we calmed down. An hour or so passes and we hear a crashing noise upstairs. You guessed it. It was the same masked men now breaking in for my sister's room. She had a balcony that had a ladder on the side for easier access. Ed bravely grabbed a bat we had by the door and headed up to check it out, while me and Nikki stayed right behind him phoning officers. Once we rounded the corner upstairs into what was my youngest sister's room, Ed swings the bat like a madman and ends up connecting with the intruder. He stumbles and the other stands there begging not to be hit. A little after, officers arrived and took both men away. It's safe to say they were not here to trick or treat. Thank you guys for watching. Please be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe for future content. Please be sure to send in your true scary stories to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. I need stories year-round, every day, every week, every month. I need stories, guys. I don't want our channel to grow stagnant. I want it to be fresh and upbeat. Until we meet again, stay sinful.
Apartments.com has helped millions of renters and could help you find your perfect place. And yep, I know perfect is a tall order, but if you're looking for an apartment or a condo, townhome, or a house even, Apartments.com has all the right tools to help you find it. Use filters and save searches to narrow down rental listings and find exactly the place for you. You can even set up alerts to get notified as places become available. So fashionistas, get your closet space or an in-unit washer-dryer. Sun lover, find as much natural light as you can handle. If you're working from home, you can have an area for your home office, an extra bathroom, a balcony, central heating and air, or a dishwasher in the kitchen. Whatever happens to be right for you, this is the place to find it. Apartments.com, the place to find a place. I've recently moved to Weed, California. It's a small town next to Mount Shasta for work. I'm an avid hiker and love exploring, so naturally, 2 days ago, I decided to go hike the mountain on one of my days off. I'm not entirely sure why, but I decided to drive my car very deep into the forest surrounding the base of the mountain, as far as the dirt road would take me anyway. It was around 3 p.m. with a clear sky, so I was pretty confident and enjoying the scenery as I got out of my car and started my hike, heading closer to the mountain. At first, it was your regular everyday hike. Lots of birds and squirrels around, that smell of nature that fills your lungs as you walk across the terrain. It really wasn't until I reached a small dried up river that I noticed that something was just off. As I stopped to look at the dried up river and take pictures, I noticed that it was strangely very, very quiet. No birds chirping, no signs of squirrels or any other animals, and even the sound of the wind that you would hear when you're on a mountain seemed to be completely gone. At the time, I thought it was just an odd coincidence and started walking up alongside the river. But as I kept walking and being able to only hear my own footsteps, I couldn't shake that feeling that I was being watched. Not the kind of feeling that makes you think someone is outside your window watching you. The kind of feeling that makes you feel multiple people or things are observing your every movement, studying you. I've never had that kind of feeling in my life, but what happened after made me completely forget about that feeling. I suddenly started to hear something out of nowhere that sounded like, the only way I can describe it is, angelic humming or maybe a song with no lyrics. But it also sounded strangely electric, like the sound telephone lines make. It wasn't very loud, but enough to make me look into the direction that it was coming from. I looked to the other side of the dried up river that had multiple trees and other foliage to see someone or something looking straight at me. It almost looked like a ghost with it looking completely white, but this thing was very clearly there. It almost looked like it was wearing a robe, I want to say, but I couldn't see any feet, hands, or even a face. Although it had an oval head, that's for sure. However, I could feel it looking straight at me, almost as if it was trying to remember my every detail or something. And even from that far away, I could tell that its entire body had a very weird texture, almost like porcelain, but if porcelain was a silky fabric. It was very obviously not human, whatever it was. I was very understandably in complete shock and terror, frozen in place, kind of scared. We both looked at each other for what felt like forever, but was most likely around 20 or 30 seconds. I very, very slowly started walking backwards. I don't think I got more than 2 steps when it sort of tilted its head, as if it was curious or even surprised at what I was doing. All the while, I could still hear that electric angelic humming, and I could have sworn too that it got a little bit louder when I took those steps back. When I turned my head to look behind me to make sure the way was clear so that I could run, the song suddenly just stopped, abruptly, without warning. This shocked me, and when I turned back to look at the thing, it was gone. No sign of it anywhere. Well, as soon as I saw that it disappeared, I ran as fast as I could, following the path that I took back. Even after it had disappeared and while I was running, I could still feel like I was being watched from all sides. I almost tripped a few times due to how fast I was going, but when I got back to my car, sounds of animals and the mountain wind suddenly came back, but I was still scared out of my mind and drove as fast as I could away from that mountain. I've never had anything paranormal happen to me in the past, and I've honestly always been very skeptical of stuff like this. But this experience has left me questioning a lot of things. I don't think that I want to go back to that mountain. I've even had a nightmare about the experience, and I'm not even sure what I saw or, to be honest, what to call it. So, I'm really not exactly sure what this was, but it sure as heck wasn't the wind or a pipe making noise. This was something that tried to scare me and my partner at the time, and something that physically presented itself, and physically pulled on our clothing and hair. So, this all started when I put together a sofa bed in the spare room at our home. My partner was at work, so after building it, I had nothing better to do than play some games. Our cat was staring down the hallway into the spare room. Not exactly unusual, but after some weird behavior from the cat, I thought that I'd have a look. What I can only describe as a black silhouette appeared and vanished within a few seconds. This wasn't actually that scary, to be honest, more just surprising, I suppose. But a few nights later, me and my partner both sat up after waking up in the dead of the night, as if we were waiting for something. It was as if the walls of the house were screaming a silent warning, just this eerie sense of anticipation for something dreadful. And all of a sudden, a very heavy dragging and clawing of the floor, very slowly, made its way down the hall and toward the bedroom. I was pulled up under the covers. This couldn't have been anything such as a household noise. There was just no way. And the cat was with us on the bed, so it definitely wasn't the cat. We sat there listening, and nothing ever came around the corner into our bedroom, but the sound seemed to stop just outside of the door. Over the next few weeks, strange things would happen too. As previously mentioned, our hair would be pulled, quick steps would make its way into the kitchen where we were and would come to a halt, as if something would be in the doorway just staring. We would return to the kitchen with every drawer and cupboard open. The big wide mirror in the bedroom would have handprints upside down on the top half of it. The last thing that happened was weeks after the last odd occurrence, though. I would sometimes stay up worrying about my partner. This was because they had breathing issues, heart issues, etc. Their breathing would slow down until it entirely stopped, before a massive breath would be taken and the loop would start up again. As I sat listening, and as the breathing slowed to almost a stop, a heavy, deep exhale came from behind me, almost horse-like. I later found out that my partner had the same thing happen twice to them and was too worried to tell me. The whole series of events isn't the first paranormal thing to happen to either of us, but sure as heck it's definitely the strangest. Whatever it was, though, it felt sinister, and thankfully it seemed to go away. The visitors would witness too many of the things mentioned, and some things smaller not mentioned as well, and I thought that I would give my experience to this community after hearing so many interesting stories here. I did try to get a recording of it once, in the dead of the night, to which my cat jumped at me, nearly giving me a heart attack, but thanks for listening, and thankfully, for now, it seems to be over, but if anything does happen again, I would really love to hear what your thoughts are, and what you think I should do about it next time. Thanks. This event happened last week. I was heading to my apartment after seeing a friend. I took the tramway at 11:30 p.m. because I didn't feel comfortable walking at night. And as soon as I sat, a man who was already sitting nearby came and sat in front of me. I got a very strange feeling about this guy, so I told my boyfriend by chat what was going on. Then I stood up to get out of the tram, but the man quickly got out after me. He was weirdly following me, not walking behind me, but sort of next to me. I was getting really anxious, knowing something was wrong, so I continued to walk to the avenue that I live in. I crossed the road, and he didn't, so I thought that I was okay, but a few seconds after, he crossed the road too, and was walking behind me again. Then he passed me and was walking in front of me, so I thought that I was just getting paranoid and that he was just walking this way too. But near my building, he stopped and waited until I sort of came up to him. He asked me if I had a boyfriend, and all I answered was, "Yes, sorry, good evening," as polite as I could. He proceeded to leave in front of me, so I was walking slower for him to be far enough away from me and to make sure that he didn't know that I was almost home. I turned into the little pathway heading to the lobby of my building, but obviously I was still anxious about this guy, even though he continued to walk. I thought that I had put my keys in my pocket, but they were in my bag, so I was sort of shaking so much that I tried multiple times to grab them, but just couldn't find them. Eventually, though, I did manage to get them out, and I opened the magnetic door, but thought of closing the door immediately after me in case the guy wanted to follow me. The door was closed, but the magnetic system wasn't on yet, and the man suddenly was running towards it and pushed it violently with horrific eyes looking at me. The door is made of glass, so I saw him, and that's when I knew that I was in real trouble. So without even thinking, I screamed as loudly as I could, and I think that's actually what saved my life in the end. Immediately, the guy ran at me, pushed me hard on the ground, and started to choke me really hard. I was too stunned because I wasn't prepared for such a violent assault. While he was choking me, I couldn't scream at all or even breathe, and nobody was coming, so I honestly thought that I was about to die, looking at his bulging eyes staring directly into mine with just pure hate. I am pretty small as well, so I wasn't really able to do anything with my arms at all. I think it wasn't that long, but it felt like a long time, and eventually I lost consciousness for a moment. When I opened my eyes again, he just ran out, and I saw the caretaker's wife beside me. The caretaker was chasing after this guy, but didn't manage to get him. He came back and called the police, and thankfully they caught this guy within 10 minutes, thanks to our description. I really still don't know why he did that to me as well, because when he attacked me, he didn't sexually assault me or rob me or anything like that, which would have been really easy to do at that point. I can't understand that his only goal was what seemed like to kill me. I'll forever be thankful enough to my caretaker who came to help me and probably saved my life, because nobody else in the building called the police or even tried to help. The man was before a judge about 3 days later and is in jail now, but denied everything, even if me and the caretaker identified him and that there was even video proof of him following me and everything. I am thankful to be alive after all of this, but it's something that has definitely affected me for the worse. So I, a 27-year-old female, went backpacking alone over the recent long weekend, which was 10 out of 10 beautiful. The second night, I camped at a beautiful high-elevation lake, which could also be accessed by a short sort of 1-mile trail, so there were a few other campers and several people who were just day hiking or fishing. It was late afternoon, and I was sitting around my camp reading when a guy, maybe mid-20s, walked by carrying a fishing pole and a small cooler. I didn't think much of it, but maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, he doubled back and came and said hi. I said hi and went back to reading, but then without warning, he then sat down on a stump next to me. I was completely taken aback at this invasion of my space. He started asking me questions that were really just statements, but in a sort of creepy amused tone, like, so you're just reading sort of thing. And then looked behind me and noticed my tent and said, "Oh, you're staying the night here alone, huh?" I didn't say anything in response to this in particular, but it was pretty obvious that I am. It's hard to explain, but his vibe was just really off. I was so uncomfortable that I couldn't even really form words or tell him that I was trying to be alone to get him to leave. I was honestly paralyzed. His eyes were so dead and dark and just drilling into me. I just responded with like ahas or yep or something to that effect and just tried to pretend that I was still reading. Without warning too, he pulls out and cracks a beer and lights a cigarette and just starts blowing it at me. At this point, I'm so uncomfortable that I just stopped responding. Soon another hiker wandered by and strikes up a conversation with this guy, and I took the opportunity to grab my water filter and bladder and pretend to need to get some water. I went to the shore and filtered some water, super slowly, and saw him walk away to go sit with this new guy, which made me super relieved. Except that he kept looking in my direction. I came back eventually and got inside my tent, and for 20 minutes everything was fine. I had the rain fly pulled back and was watching the sunset and loosely organizing my things when he sort of popped out from behind my tent and stood maybe 1 foot from my door, just looking down at me. He didn't say anything, but just started laughing really creepily, sort of fakely again. I asked, "What?" And his response was, "This is just really funny." I felt literally sick to my stomach and finally responded with something like, "I'm taking a nap now, so have a good night." He laughed again, but luckily left. Later I saw him still wandering around the camp with no real purpose, still looking in my direction often. I had no service, but I wrote down his last name, at least what was written on his cooler, and where he said that he was from while talking to other hikers in my notes app, just in case, and I slept with my pocket knife close as well. I debated leaving camp that night, but ended up staying and just leaving super early in the morning in case he came back. Now, normally while backpacking, I think the worst thing that could happen is I might run into a bear or sprain an ankle or something, and maybe this seems not that terrible as you're listening to it, but this truly was the most unsettling experience I've ever had in the backcountry. I don't know what this guy's deal was, but there was something really off about him. I'm sure that I'll be back out soon, but hopefully somewhere far away from that guy. This happened about 8 years ago in August of 2013. I was camping in far north Queensland, Australia, in a place called Barron Falls, which is northwest of Cairns. I, a 21-year-old girl, was camping with my 2 male friends, who were backpacking from Estonia, Theo and Charlie. Where we set up camp was not an official campsite. Rather, we walked along the tourist path, climbed over a railing, followed a train track for a few kilometres, and eventually veered off onto the dense forest, downhill to a river. It certainly wasn't easy to get to this area, and there wasn't any mobile phone service, but Theo knew about it from friends who had shown him previously. The site was beautiful. We were surrounded by a tropical forest and were only a short walk upstream from the waterfall. After setting up camp, we walked to the waterfall where both Theo and Charlie plunged from the cliff into the water below. I decided not to follow. I was and still am scared of heights, and the possibility of hurting myself just wasn't alluring. I sat and watched them for a while before eventually decided to return to camp and read my book. I was totally relaxed too, enjoying the serenity, taking in the beauty around me. What had been an exciting, adventurous day was then interrupted though by a deep, sinister laughing coming from the forest surrounding our campsite. Instantly alerted, I felt chills run through my body as I scanned the forest, trying to detect where the laughter had come from. But there was nothing. I sort of tried to forget about it, convincing myself that my mind must have been playing tricks on me. Theo and Charlie returned and told me that they had forgotten firelighters for the campfire. They said that they would need to travel to the nearest store to buy some and that I should wait at camp. I told them that I didn't feel comfortable staying at the camp, but didn't mention the laughter that I'd heard before. I didn't want them to think that I was stupid, or for context, at the time I had quite a large crush on Charlie. Stupidly, I wanted him to think that I was cool. They told me that it would be fine and that they would be back before dark. So, reluctantly, I agreed and let them go. It was about 4 p.m. now, and I continued reading my book. I began to think back about it, and I realized that the walk back to the car was maybe about 20 or 30 minutes, so they would be gone for well over an hour. At this time of year, dusk would be at 5:30, or maybe a little bit after that, and I would therefore likely be alone in this remote area in the dark. I distracted myself with my book, but as dusk began to settle, I struggled to read the pages, and fear began to set in. After about an hour as well, I swear that I could hear footsteps in the forest. My first thought was that Theo and Charlie had returned, and I was instantly relieved that I was no longer alone. I listened for their voices, but heard nothing. At that, my heart dropped, because it dawned on me that it may not be them. I started to panic. Then came the laughter, the same deep, sinister laughter that I'd heard before. Only this time, it seemed much closer. I sprung to my feet and surveyed the forest, and that was when I saw him. He was standing on the other side of the stream, which was connected to the river, standing on a log, and what I saw was absolutely bizarre. He was wearing an immaculate tuxedo with a top hat and everything. I remember being puzzled as to how he was able to get to this area in such clean, formal clothes. And I at first thought maybe he was an apparition, or that I was hallucinating or something. I did a double take, and I wasn't. I then studied the man's face. It's hard to describe, but he appeared to have suffered from severe burns and had deep scarring covering his face. His hair was shoulder length, very wiry and unkempt. He laughed, that same laugh that I'd heard from the forest. It had definitely come from him. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes. I'd planned to sprint into the forest if he charged at me, and observe that small creek between us would at least slow him down. He then asked, "What are you doing here, all alone?" with a really unsettling smile on his face. Luckily, I was able to remain calm and told him that I was camping with my male friends and that they went to get some supplies but would be back soon. The man laughed again. He asked me how long we would be there for, and I lied and said that we were leaving the next day. It seemed as if this man wanted to provoke a reaction out of me or something, that he wanted me to panic and run, and that he wanted to chase me. But I remained calm and acted as if we were having a standard conversation, and I think this confused him. Miraculously, I heard Theo and Charlie's voices approaching. The man seemed alarmed at this and said that he saw somebody else camping upstream and that he was going to check on them. He left, and minutes later, Theo and Charlie returned. I immediately told them what happened, and they laughed and thought that I was making it up, that it was a lame attempt to scare them. Tears began to gather in my eyes, and Charlie realized that I was serious. Theo didn't seem fazed. He was a very stereotypical backpacker and had the carefree nature travelers tend to have. Charlie, however, assured me that I would be okay and had me sleep between him and Theo for the next 2 nights. I barely slept at all for those nights. I kept listening for the laughter, but fortunately, I never heard it again. For years after, I searched online for any reports of similar encounters, and I never found anything. But I've always contemplated what would have happened if Theo and Charlie hadn't returned at that moment. I shudder at the thought. I would love to hear what you guys think about this man's intentions, and if I was right to be terrified. I haven't been camping since, and I don't plan on going again, which maybe that's the really sad part about this whole story, is that it just ruined camping for me. So thankfully, I've since moved out of the spooky apartment where a few of my experiences took place. However, on my final day of moving, our spectral roommate decided to give me one last fright. I had returned to grab the last boxes, lock up the doors, and pass the keys off to the landlord. I was alone in the apartment with my sister waiting for me in the car outside. I'd been making trips up and down, bringing the last of our stuff, and finally there was just one box upstairs, in the back room. I went into the room to grab the box, and somehow this box had been completely unpacked and refolded. The part that freaked me out, though, is that the box contained statuettes of various Greek and Roman deities. These statuettes were pulled from the box, individually unwrapped, and placed facing backwards along the wall or on the floor where the table that had held them used to sit. Why backwards? That part seemed really strange to me. I mean, I could understand not wanting us to take them with us, perhaps, so laying them out again makes sense, sort of. But why backwards? Anyway, the door had been locked, and I helped my girlfriend pack that box. I distinctly remember taping it shut even, and pushing it against the wall near the door. Even if my landlord had randomly decided to check our progress on the move or something like that and came into the house, there's just no way that there would have been enough time to do that. Plus, why would he unpack our stuff? I asked the downstairs neighbour on our way out if he'd heard anything, but he hadn't. Now, the reason why I started with this was that before the move I was working at a country club. My work usually had me downstairs alone in the basement prep kitchen, and on my first day, one of the senior employees gave me a quick tour of the place, which was massive and easy to get lost in. The employee's name was G, and she was very hesitant to take me to the basement prep kitchen for some reason. She even asked another senior employee if he would show me the basement kitchen instead, but he was busy, so she got stuck with it. So we make our way down the stairs around some corners, and we wind up in a small kitchen. The kitchen is surrounded by a well-lit, well-used storage, a sort of dishwashing area, a dim and barely used dining hall, and a big set of double doors that led to the sub-basement storage. Like I said, the place was way too big. The layout is kind of important though, so to be brief and accurate, if you're standing in the front, there's a prep table to your left, and on the other side of which is the well-lit dish storage. To the right is another prep table against a wall. On the other side of the wall is the entrance to the dim dining hall and the double doors to the sub-basement. So, while working the prep station, you can see the dish and the storage area, but not the dining hall or the sub-basement doors. They were around the corner, so to get to the dining hall, you'd have to cross in front of the sub-basement door. Now, during my little tour, G had told me that she doesn't like going down here at all, and that she absolutely refuses to go into the dining hall alone or the sub-basement at all. But we joked a little bit about how spooky it was down there, but then her tone got really serious, and she said to me, "No, but seriously, stay away from the doors and ignore anything you hear from down there, alright?" Straight out of a horror movie, but okay, I guess. My first day on the job, I'm not asking dumb questions about spooky sub-basements. So I worked my first shift without incident, as well as the next 2 weeks without any problems. But on the first day of my third week, I went down to the basement prep to start working. It was 3 in the afternoon, and I was pretty excited about that day, as we'd had an event going on, and it'd be my first time working an action station. So I wasn't thinking about spooky basement doors or anything, just happily slicing ham for the day and thinking about the night to come. But over the hum of the slicer, I thought I heard one of my co-workers walk behind me. I even thought that I saw a flicker of movement on my right. I thought it was weird that they were headed that way. I hadn't seen anybody go into the sub-basement or dining hall yet, but I figured that they were probably grabbing something for the event, so I just kept slicing. But that's when I heard a loud thump, like someone had taken a rubber dodgeball and threw it against a door. It made me jump, and I wasn't sure where it came from, so I turned off the slicer and I listened closely. I didn't hear it again, so I just went back to switch on the slicer. But, right as I touched it, there was another thump. For sure that time, too, I knew that it came from around the corner, by the sub-basement and the dining hall. In my mind, it was obvious that someone must have gotten stuck in the basement or dining hall and needed me to open the door for them. So I pulled off my gloves and I went around the corner to check which door they needed open. I tried the dining hall door first and poked my head in, but there wasn't anyone waiting on the other side. It was dim in there, but the room was empty, except for the few tables pushed against the walls, so I closed the door and moved over to the sub-basement doors, which had a small window set above each doorknob, kind of like the doors they have on classrooms and such. But when I tried the door, it was locked. I thought that it was weird to keep the door locked like that, but then I remembered what G had said, and I got a little spooked, I must admit. I started to walk away from the door when I heard that same thump, only twice as loud, against the doors, both of them, behind me. I wanted to keep walking too, but my brain told me to turn around and look. The doors were still shut, and I couldn't see anything through the window from where I stood. I was very freaked out though at that point, and decided to take an early break to have a smoke. While out on break, I talked to another co-worker of mine whom we call JJ. He'd been employed at the club for over 10 years, so I asked him about the sub-basement, and once again the tone changed, and he just sort of looked down and away and said, "Just don't go back down there. I've been here for 10 years, and I've only gone down there once." Now, hearing Jay talk like that was really weird. He was a large tattooed ex-bouncer, not the kind to be scared of even a bear, much less a spooky dark basement. So, I finished my smoke and begrudgingly went back down to finish my prep. Now extra motivated to get it done quickly. I came down the stairs and, as I was rounding the corner to head down the hall to the kitchen, I saw someone clear as day, way down at the other end, walk around the corner headed to the basement and the dining hall. They looked to be wearing all black clothes and a black cap, which is the kitchen staff uniform, so I thought for sure that was one of my co-workers looking for me or something, so I called out to them. "Hey, I'm over here. What do you need?" There was no response, so I thought maybe they didn't hear me, so I kept going past my station and round the corner to find no one standing there. I poked my head in the dining hall again, and of course, I didn't find anyone. Now, I was legitimately terrified and started to freak out a bit. I started to head back to my station, where once again I heard the loud thumps against the doors. This time, it occurred to me that it must be my chef messing with me. He was a notorious prankster, and there's always a bit of hazing when it comes to new kitchen crew. He must get everybody with this gag. Jay had to be in on it, and G must have been another victim or something. But that was my thought process when I turned around and walked to the doors and put my face up against the glass and cupped my hands around it to block out the glare. I couldn't see anything through the black at all, not even the first few stairs, which I thought was weird. Shouldn't I at least be able to, see a little bit of light? Shouldn't a little bit of light be able to make it through the window from the hallway lights? I mustered up my bravest voice and shouted, "Very funny, Chef B, but I see you." I waited for a response, but nobody said anything. But I did start to get a really weird feeling, like I was standing next to an electrical charge or something, is the only way that I can describe it. It was like I was getting sort of tickled by TV static. That's the only way that I can describe it, but that's how it felt. I pulled my face away from the window and glanced behind me to make sure that nobody was there trying to sneak up on me. And when I put my face back to the glass, my heart instantly dropped, because I could now see the stairs. Which means that as I was peeking through the glass, someone or something was standing right on the other side, blocking out the light from the hallway and giving the illusion that I was looking into darkness. The only problem with that is whoever or whatever it was would have to have been rather large to block the whole window in its entirety. With that realization, I practically sprinted through the basement and back up the stairs to the main kitchen, where I found the entire kitchen crew happily at work, even Chef B. I told Jay about what had happened, and G must have overheard me because she just quietly said, "I told you to ignore anything you heard down there." And it was soon after this that some weird things were happening in my apartment. Thankfully, nothing has happened since I moved, but that box being unpacked, that was definitely freaky.